So it's 4 o'clock, klockan 4. Dear Therese, dear Alex Rühle, dear Göran von Sydow, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First, thank you, of course, for being here at the residence in the name of myself and of Christina, my wife, who is in the audience. And hopefully as well, I hope that we will have some watching as well from the stream. I'm especially glad about this event today. And it is in a certain way as well a result of job sharing. Since job sharing allows you to read as well sometimes a book from the cover to the end. And this is what I did with this book here, Alex Rühle, Europa, wo bist du? Unterwegs in einem aufgewühlten Kontinent. And I can only recommend it. It's a travel with a backpack and interrail through Europe with many sometimes emotional, sometimes depressing, sometimes uplifting stories about how the European Union is seen from different countries. And their actual political and societal situation of those different countries has a deep impact on how the EU as a whole is seen and how the organization and its actors are perceived. Many stories in this book are about how Europe struggles with the war in Ukraine. They are often about migration from the south, from the east, and as well with a view to the refugees themselves, but as well to what migration does to some of the political societies. And there's as well stories about innovation, about security, about parliamentarians and bureaucrats in Brussels and in other capitals. So I thought it would be great to take a kind of sober, realistic, but hopefully at the end as well, a positive look on the state of our union ahead of the upcoming elections. We will start now shortly with a reading of the book by Alex Rühle himself, who is a correspondent of one of the biggest German newspapers, the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and you live here as well in Stockholm. Afterwards, we will discuss first what we've heard from your reading, and then many other questions with Therese Larsson-Hultin, who is here with us from Svenska Dagbladet, who lived and worked quite some time in Germany and has many European perspectives to give, and with Göran von Sydow, who is the director of the Swedish Institute for European Policy Studies, the Sieps. And coming a bit later, but hopefully still coming then for the discussion, will be Hans Wallmark. He is the head of the Defense Commission, member of Parliament of the Riksdag, and he was as well the head of the European Committee in the Riksdag. Our moderator will be Clarissa Blomqvist, who is as well the person to thank for all the organization for this event. This is, from my perspective, a panel for all. So for those who have not thought about Europe so much, and for those who are experts. So all questions are allowed. Why should I vote on June 9? What will migration do to this union? Do we have to be a fortress to stay Europe, or do we have to open up to stay close to our values? Will we be effective in climate change fight so that Bordeaux can still be a place where you have wine and grapes and it's not too dry and too infertile? So I'm very thankful, if I look at the audience, that you made it here, that we have really a very diversified audience with many students coming from Uppsala and Stockholm. And I just ask you later on in the Q&A, don't be shy, ask your questions, because this is the moment to learn something about Europe and about the elections coming. So let the reading begin, and it's up to you, Alex. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and thanks for the invitation to have a reading here and to have my very first reading in English. Let's see how that works out. Here is a little map of my wild journey, 20,000 kilometers, 33 borders, 4 months, 1 interrail ticket, 1 backpack, 1 frozen shoulder afterwards. I knew I wanted to start in Athens, first because they invented Europe, and second, and this is the real reason, until the financial crisis, we all thought that everything was going to be steady and stable. No matter what happened, the EU was some kind of stable background radiation for all of us. Well, you can be wrong. Since the financial crisis, the EU has lurched from crisis to crisis. And the question I was following on my journey was, Will it hold or will it tear us apart? How much longer will it last? And what are we talking about when we speak about Europe, us, 400 millions, and who is we or us? I think we'll speak about all this with Clarissa later on, but first I would like to take you just for 15 minutes or 15 minutes on this wild, long journey and ask you to get on a bus from Sarajevo to Zagreb. The fact that there are only buses between these two capitals is a sad legacy of the Yugoslav wars, bombed out infrastructure, and since then nationalist provincial princes who are all incapable of or have no interest in building something common like a railway line. It's a miserable journey in an old bus across remote villages, but thanks to this bus ride, I meet Kabir. Kabir Prusak from Sarajevo, who wants to take his mother to hospital in Zagreb. She has 2 liters of water in her lungs, which is why Kabir is more annoyed by the bus jolting than I am. After an hour, Kabir comes to the back and says that he has ordered a taxi because he doesn't want to put his mum through this wild fidgeting anymore, and that I'm welcome to come with them. Wait. He inspires confidence, his mum even more so why not? And so we traveled through Croatia in a taxi under a milky full moon. Kabir's mum is pretty quiet the whole journey, a gentle woman with a soft smile. When he walks through Sarajevo with her, Kabir says she's often approached by young men or women who thank her for her time at university. Mevlida Prusak taught architecture there. When I ask why she's making this grueling journey, as there are hospitals in Sarajevo too, he just laughs dryly. My father was in the hospital we went to yesterday for a brief medical history in 2001, a routine examination, but he caught some germs and died miserably. The hospital looks even worse now. I don't want to lose my mum there too. Kabir is 41. He was 11 when the siege of his hometown Sarajevo began. Again and again, he says, a funny story comes to my mind. And then each time, a new snapshot from this war. A funny story comes to my mind. Our neighbor, whose husband came home and saw his wife vacuuming with a candle in her hand. The woman was so used to living without electricity that even when she was able to vacuum, she didn't think to simply press the light switch. A funny story comes to my mind. At school, 2 pupils had to go out every morning to get breakfast for the class, a bread and a little carton of milk. One day, when it was his turn with his bench neighbor, they were shot at from the hills on the way back. Big dum-dum bullets. The earth was spraying around us. We ran, panicking like 2 cartoon characters, and dropped our milk and bread in fright. When we arrived, the teacher scolded us. The lovely bread, the precious milk, are you stupid? That's how normal it was to be shot at. Snipers? Sure, but watch your food anyway. Normality was upside down for 4 years. 4 of Kabir's friends died during the years of the siege, he recounts. Shot, shrapnel, grenade, shot. It's quiet in the car. We are driving past vast empty winter fields. Kabir strokes his mother's shoulder, and the moon is now shining so deeply into our car, as if it's desperate to hear what Kabir has to say. And after the war, did you celebrate the end of the siege in any way? Oh yes, says Kabir. Oh yes, definitely, by living a decent life. When we finally arrive at the bus station in Zagreb, where a friend of Kabir's is already waiting to take Mevlida straight to hospital, our bus from Sarajevo is also just turning in. 200 euros for nothing. Not at all, says Kabir. My mother was definitely more comfortable in the front passenger seat. We bid each other a fond farewell, but then Kabir's friend says, nonsense, you'll fit in the car too. and so we are off, me crammed into the boot of the car between the child seat and nappy packs. As soon as he sets off, Kabir's friend, a former DJ, starts praying very loudly for Kabir's mother. Apparently it's a lot about Maria. Then he calls his wife to see if she can quickly look for a hotel for me. Kabir himself is as happy as a child. 2 Bosnian Muslims from Sarajevo, a Protestant from Munich, and a fervent Zagreb Catholic, as he calls his friend, together in one car. That's Europe. We say our final goodbyes at the hospital. The Catholic friend kindly drives me to a hotel. And during the 5-minute drive, he really starts his instant conversion program. I should radically open my heart to Jesus Christ. Radically. The end is near, Alex. The Ukraine war is written in the books. A nuclear catastrophe is imminent. And a meteorite will hit immediately afterwards. Someone tell me I'm a pessimist. The hotel is not a hotel at all, but a youth hostel with exactly 1 last bed available in a room for 6. I dimly remember, this takes place in March 22, I dimly remember that there's actually a pandemic raging and new record incidences. And in the bed I've been allocated, there's an empty biscuit box and worn-out pink slippers. But I'm so tired. It's 11:30. I have no idea where I am. The crazy Catholic has already gone home. And if there's a nuclear strike, including a meteorite coming soon, then it doesn't matter anyway. So you can see here how I was traveling all around, more the periphery than the center. And of course, in 15 minutes, you only can get little glimpses. To give you a short glimpse of the beauty of Völkerverständigung or mellanfolklich Samverstand, adventure, surprises. One short moment in Algeciras, which is very, very visual, down south in Spain. I was in Ceuta before that, the little Spanish town on Moroccan soil. It's still dark in Africa, but on the European side, in Algeciras, swallows are writing their morning song in the sky. What they considerately do not write in the sky is the announcement that I'm in for one of the most exhausting days of the whole journey. At Algeciras station, an interesting dialogue develops with a friendly woman at the ticket counter. The further it progresses, the more I think I'm in a Samuel Beckett production about the waiting room of life rather than a real railway station. I tell her that I want to go to Lisbon. Woman looks at the passenger in astonishment, then at her screen, again the passenger, again her screen. Lisboa? No way. She smiles very friendly. Passenger, well, perhaps in stages. Can I go to Cadiz or Sevilla first? Woman looks at her computer for a while and then says decisively, no way, no Portugal. Passenger, are there any trains to Faro, to the border? Could you have a look? Woman disappears back into her computer, clicks around a bit with the mouse and says, we have no international information. You must go Madrid or Barcelona. Madrid, but it's a huge diversion. Woman repeats slowly but with stoic friendliness, Madrid, Madrid, Barcelona. But Barcelona, that's where I come from. That's at the other end of the country. International information only in France. You can go France. She says it in a very engaging tone along the lines of, that would be an original idea, wouldn't it? Woman pushes a post-it under the windscreen with España, Francia written on it, which doesn't really help the passenger. Passenger, okay, are there any trains at all today from Algeciras? woman, after a long look at her screen, I really don't know. Okay, this is just a short, but sometimes it went very smoothly, and it was wonderful. I would recommend it to everyone. And now, just to give you one little example of, it's a political book. It's about us and about everything, and yeah, as I said, will it last? So let me take you to Estonia, to Narva, up there, the most eastern town in Estonia, at the Russian border. The early morning ferry journey from Helsinki to Tallinn only takes 2.5 hours, and yet is the biggest turning point of this trip. Before that, despite all the news drama, the war was always far away. We were just 6 weeks into the war when I started. Or when I came to Estonia, 8-10 weeks. From Tallinn onwards, however, there is a constant tremor in the air. Every conversation, even if it starts somewhere else, soon revolves around Putin, cyber attacks, howitzer deliveries, German promises of helmets, and the NATO alliance. Something else is different from now on. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, everywhere history seems to be even louder, even more present than the already very loud, very present present. Or let me put it like this. The present here resembles a room that is far too crowded. The eras protrude into the present like undismantled backdrop walls. There's a pub at the very edge of the EU in the far northeast of Estonia, and Katri Raik is sitting there, obviously in a very bad mood. A few meters down the embankment next to the wooden tables, the Narva flows down towards the Baltic Sea. It's the first nice day of the year, but Katri Raik, the mayor of Narva, has neither eyes for the river nor for the gulls. Raik has only just sat down when she points to the old wooden table and exclaims, "This is the beginning of Europe." She throws the glasses on the table and glares at me almost angrily. Again, talking about the periphery is just plain stupid. This, her index finger presses on the wood of the table as if to test its stability. This is the beginning and the end of Europe. And it's just as much NATO territory as Germany. I had obviously chosen the wrong way to start our conversation by asking how it felt to be on the outermost periphery of the EU. On the other side of the river, about 100 meters away, Russia begins. On this side, fishermen and children playing in swimsuits. On the other side, fishermen and children playing in swimsuits. On this side, Hermannsburg, built by the Danish at the end of the 13th century. On the other side, the fortress of Ivangorod, built under Ivan III. Deep below the two fortresses is the Bridge of Friendship, which is still called the same as it was in Soviet times, when the two cities merged and it almost didn't matter which side you lived on. The sides of the bridge are now surrounded by high fences. On this afternoon, the lorry traffic is backed up for many hours. I apologize for the periphery question, which was not meant to be in the least disparaging. Raik apologizes for the brusque answer and sighs, "You know, this is the third really serious crisis I've witnessed here in Narva, and unfortunately it's the same every time. First come the foreign journalists, then the Estonian ministers, and finally the diplomats. The foreign journalists ask stupid, clueless questions. The ministers and diplomats ask questions of suspicion. Is this really Europe in your eyes? Whether we are not secretly Russians and I'm hiding a Putin portrait under the bed. You know, I feel like a monkey that has been trained to always give the same answers. Yes, we are Europeans. Yes, we are Estonians. And yes, the vast majority of Estonian Russians are very happy to live in Estonia." A week after my visit, on 9 June, Putin will compare himself to Peter the Great in a pompous speech, explicitly praising the Tsar for having reclaimed and strengthened Narva from the Swedes as parts of his expansionist policy. It seems that today it is also up to us to reclaim and strengthen. I ask Reich if she's sometimes afraid. Instead of answering yes or no, she says, paragraph 5, NATO treaty, that's our guarantee. She says the sentence so quickly, apparently she often thinks of paragraph 5, NATO treaty. The so-called mutual assistance paragraph, which states that an armed attack against one or more of the contracting parties in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all. Of course I often think about that, says Reich. We have understood the situation better for years than you ever have. We see the border every day. Twice in the conversation, Reich emphasizes that the feeling of threat also stems from the fact that Estonia is downright tiny compared to Ukraine. I will shorten now. We talk a lot about the difficult situation. Many Russians live in Narva. Many Russians live in Estonia, but especially in Narva. Double nationalities and a problem of loyalty in case of Russian mobilization. I skip all that. Katri Reich's initial roughness has long since given way to a very direct warmth here in the Grenzcafé, as it is called. Unfortunately, Katri Reich then has to leave. Her mobile phone has been buzzing nervously the whole time anyway, as if all the swarms of mosquitoes in eastern Estonia were breeding in it. She takes me into the city. In the car, as we drive past the barred border with several EU flags hanging, she turns to me and says that I'm always talking about the Baltic states. But unfortunately, this Baltic state as a political and cultural entity is just another European and especially German myth based on complete ignorance. You know, we Estonians feel like Northern Europeans. Estonian is closely related to Finnish. People go on holiday to Finland. Many work there or in Sweden. We are much closer to the Scandinavians than to the Latvians or Lithuanians. Lithuania is Catholic, Latvia is half Catholic, half Lutheran. In Estonia, the church plays no role at all. And so in every respect, there are more differences than similarities between the three countries. I will be hearing this again and again in the coming days and weeks. If it helps you Western Europeans with your rudimentary knowledge of geography to structure this whole area between Bulgaria and Estonia halfway, then go on saying Baltic states for a while, as long as you don't say post-Soviet states. But we are actually fundamentally different, please. All right, there's no Baltic region, but is there anything left of German influences from the Hanseatic era in Estonia? The castles, a few loanwords, Reisebüro, Thymian, Wein, Wurst. And some North German recipes in connection with the food. You can get roast pork and sauerkraut in any restaurant. Well, one difference, our sauerkraut is more flavorsome, much better. German sauerkraut is drowning in water, disgusting. But this is a good test. So for you, if you go to Estonia, an Estonian restaurant that doesn't have roast pork and sauerkraut on the menu isn't really a restaurant at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex Rühle. Very warm welcome also from me here to the embassy and also to the people following us online. My name is Clarissa Blomqvist. I'm head of press and PR here at the embassy, and I'll be moderating today's event. Thank you very much for taking us with you on your trip, even though a short trip today, much longer when you traveled for 4 months there through Europe. You've met so many nice people, you said, and people from different backgrounds, different countries, different social, religious backgrounds. Now, what would you say, what defines Europe and what unites us Europeans? To start with a very simple question.
That's a hard one for the beginning. Let's stretch a bit all together. I can answer with a little anecdote, perhaps. You all know James Joyce, the famous writer, and when he started, he was an English teacher at the Bertele school, and he got an assignment in Trieste, down there in Italy. So he took his wife, and they went by train to Trieste, and I don't know how it happened, but they got off at Ljubljana thinking they have arrived in Trieste, and until they realized their mistake, the train had long departed, and they had to stay for the night in a park nearby. And when I told this story to Alex Steger, who's a wonderful poet and writer in Ljubljana, when we met at the station of Ljubljana, where there's a little statue for James Joyce, he said, laughing, he laughed out very loudly, and then he said, you know, that's a good definition for Europe. You feel like you have arrived even in places where you don't belong. And the short version of it would be, I like a lot the slogan, United in Diversity, which means, to put it in one word, tolerance. So a long one, a short one.
And also quite a deep thought to start off the questions and answers, which I'm sure you have here in the audience. I'd like to open the floor for questions to the author. Please raise your hand if you have one and identify yourself with name and affiliation, and the microphone will be coming up to you.
You weren't prepared for that. I can build a little bridge. Yeah, I can. Oh, thanks for the question. Yeah, of course. I wanted to go not clockwise around, but the other direction. I knew I wanted to start in Athens, and then I wanted to follow up Eastern Europe, and then the war broke out. And I started on the 10th of March, so the war just really had started, and nobody knew what would happen, and many still thought in 2 weeks it will all be over. So I changed all my plans and just drove off, going clockwise in a way. And I knew 1/3 of the locations I wanted to visit. For example, Ceuta, which I mentioned, or a place we will come upon, Riace in Calabria. And 1/3 was I wanted to meet certain people who were Europeans for me. And I was always trying to find one question for every country which is related to Europe. So when I came to Sweden, for example, I had the bliss, the luck, the happiness to find Hans Ruin and his wife Claudia Lindén. There was a Germanistic professor in Kiel who, when I said, I'm going to Sweden and I still don't have really a topic, but I would like to talk with them about NATO, I mean, neutrality, NATO, something. So she said, you know, I've been to a party and there was this couple and they were quarreling incredibly loud. I can ask them whether they would reinvent this quarrel for you. And they did. They invited me for bolognese pasta. Hans made a very good pasta. And then they clashed. And I was allowed to write everything down, and that was my Sweden chapter. So in a nutshell, so 1/3 was interesting person, 1/3 was places, European cities, European villages, European disasters, populist places, and 1/3 was by chance and driving and finding people, like, for example, Hans. So yeah, now it's up to you. I gave you 4 minutes.
Yes, first the young man in the white shirt, please.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Bruno Göbel. I study Peace and Conflict Studies at Uppsala University. And
Hey.
Sorry?
Hey.
Hey. I'm very happy that you started with a story from the Balkans, because I think that not everywhere in Europe and in every conversation the Balkans is considered part of Europe. It can sometimes be so seen as a backyard, and
it is a backyard.
It is a backyard, but maybe part of the concept and not the concept. And maybe if you could share some of the stories that you have encountered regarding frustrations or hopes and dreams for a European future for the region, I'd be very happy.
Good question. Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's why I chose this chapter. It was the real adventure started there. That they just took me out of the bus and we drove there with a taxi, not knowing what would happen next. That was really some sort of this is the real start, because nothing was planned and who knows where we will arrive and all that. But the Balkans also is, I mean, the negative version of Europe in a way. 1981, no one would have thought that Yugoslavia will fall apart and they will slaughter each other. No one. And in 91 it started and didn't stop for 9 years. And more than 100,000 deaths. And that's where nationalism leads us to. And even nowadays, not even railways are back on track, so to say. So everybody's sitting around his little fire camp and talking about his little narrative of being a victim of XY and all the others being also victims of each other. And so this is for me the dark side of what can happen. And this is also, it shows the strength for me of the European Union, this supranationalist structure, not to do again and again and again the same mistakes with easy solution and easy black and white narratives, us the heroes, all others the assholes and the murderers. Yeah, and it's impressive to see. It's impressive to see how much they are longing for being part, and how long they're waiting now. It's embarrassing. When I was there, that was in March 22. Europe was really nervous, knowing in a way they hadn't done their homework, neither the EU in a way, towards the Balkan states who were waiting and waiting and waiting and who were given promises, yes, one day we will accept you. So the 2 days I was in Sarajevo, 3 or 4 high-level European diplomats flew in to say, yeah, please don't, the Russian influence, please push it back and we will help you. But I mean, that diminished again, this travel diplomacy, I would say, but perhaps the others will have other insights. Yeah, sorry, a long answer.
We had one more question and then we'll start the panel discussion, but if I could ask you to keep it short.
Sonja, my name is Rainer Gartermann, ex-correspondent in Stockholm, still part-time journalist. I don't know whether you share the headlines we saw there. Europe, a turbulent continent. In that case, I would like to ask you, do you know another continent in the world which is less turbulent than Europe?
You're right. You're absolutely right. That's what it's about, my journey, to show that this whole project is 75 years of peace, which is a miracle in history and in the world. The title is Europa, wo bist du? Because I was searching for Europe desperately. And then unterwegs in einem aufgewühlten Kontinent. Aufgewühlt is more because of the war and because of everything seemed to explode and who knows what will happen next. That's a bit other than turbulent, I would say. But of course, you're right, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alex. And I think we'll have more time for more questions. But if I could ask our distinguished panel here to come forward.
Or should I?
Why don't you stand here, Therese?
Okay.
And Göran, yes. Thank you very much for joining us. Very warm welcome, Therese Larsson-Hultin, for working for the Swedish daily Svenska Dagbladet as the political analyst there. And Therese has also traveled widely and been a reporter from many different countries. And as we already mentioned, especially also from Germany. So thank you for coming here. And I also read that you have called yourself a travel addict before. So I guess you guys have much to talk about.
I was a bit envious when I saw his trip. I did Interrail 3 times, but it was a long time ago.
Okay, and very warm welcome, Göran von Sydow, director of Sieps. Thank you for coming. Now, we are only 2 weeks away from the European Parliament election. So let's talk about why it is important to vote. Oh, just in time, very warm welcome, our distinguished panelist, Hans Wallmark. Thank you for coming. I know your schedule is busy. Swedish member of parliament and member of the EU Affairs Committee and the chair of the Defense Committee. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, with 400 million people across 27 countries casting their vote in about 2 weeks' time, surely still many people wonder why should they vote. We're also thinking about many young people who are voting for the first time. Here in Sweden alone, 572,000 young people get to vote for the first time. Now, Göran von Sydow, if I could start with you. What do you think? Why should people go and vote? What's on stake here?
Well, I think first obvious reason is that we have democracy with universal suffrage, so let's make use of it. If you don't make use of your own vote, basically you'll only give it on loan to someone else. There are many examples of this. One example that I quite enjoy, or not enjoy perhaps, but thinking about is that if in the referendum about Brexit, 8 years ago, if the young voters had voted at the level of the average in the population, the result and the outcome would have been Remain. So just to think about, the cost of not showing up to that vote for those who had that point of view for young voters. I think that's one case in point. And the other one is also in European Parliament election. We saw that in 2019, with increasing turnout, particularly among young voters, that also led to the shifting power balance within European politics, in particular with the relative gains of the Green Party and the Liberal Party. So just to say, there was an increasing mobilization, in particular in Germany, in France, and in Spain, among younger voters, that actually had an impact on the result. And then finally, of course, European Parliament is a quite powerful institution these days. So they decide about many things. So.
Mm-hmm. And we'll come back to the things they decided upon. Yes,
I just want to emphasize what you said about Brexit. I was in Manchester during the vote, and when I went out talking to people the morning after, everyone I met almost were in shock, and they were like, "Oh, had we known this, I would not have voted. I just wanted to stick it up to the government in London." So there were so many who regretted their votes. We don't know what would have happened, but still. And also, of course, people die for the right to vote. People go to jail for the right to vote. Of course, we should take it's something that we should cherish, and it's also the only direct body where we could give our vote.
And Hans Wallmark, why is it important for Swedish voters?
Well, as my colleagues here says, remember the presidential elections some years ago in Florida, when they were really searching for votes, and they're starting to look at all the ballots, the presidential election between Bush Jr. and Al Gore. So, every vote is counted. And in Sweden, in the general election to the parliament, we have a turnout that are around 90%, a little over 90%, and it's not mandatory. And to regional and local level, it's around 80%. and to the European Parliament is 55 or something like that. So I think it's very important for a country that are very proud of a high turnout in the general elections also to try to have it quite high also in the European Parliament election. Because, as you said, I think it's important, and this is a right that people are dying for in other countries and continents.
And small countries will only obviously have a smaller number of seats than larger. What would you say to the voters in smaller countries? Why is their vote important?
Well, every vote is important, and every citizen is important. But it also naturally, I mean, also in Sweden, I see some colleagues from the parliament here. We have also smaller constituencies, Gotland, and we have bigger ones, Stockholm, and that's naturally. And therefore, we have also smaller countries. I don't consider Sweden as a smaller country. I consider Sweden as a mid-sized country. Mid-sized dog with good exactly good on barking.
Well, actually, the small countries are overcompensated even. Yes. Had it been completely proportional, then Germany would have even more seats in the European Parliament. So there is a little bit of balance in there as well.
Your votes are more important or have a greater weight than the German vote. We are 83 million in Germany and have 93 seats. So Sweden has 10 million inhabitants. If the quota were proportional, you would have 11 seats, but you have 21. Which means the double in a way. Finland, which is again half the size of Sweden, has not 10, but 15. So this is to give strength and empower. Pardon?
And Malta.
They have 6.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also, if you live in a country where you haven't voted for the government, then it's a way to get your side of politics to Brussels and get your voice heard. Mm-hmm.
Now, if we look at the potential outcome, surveys have predicted that the advance of right-wing parties a lot. What effect could the rise of these parties have on EU policies? Hans Wallmark, what would you say?
Probably a lot. We saw that with this, the current commission, that you had the negotiations between the EPP group, the SOD group, and the Liberal ALDE. I don't know what name they have for the moment, Renaissance or ALDE, but the Liberal group. And I think that one of the reasons for that was also that you saw this the green package, the Fit for 55, with ECR, IED, and other groups. Then probably you can also see a shift. Adding to that also that the European Council, I think I can count to 4 social democratic prime ministers now in Europe. So you have also a center right wing majority among the governments in the European Union for the moment.
Well, I think first of all, these are forecasts. We don't know. As I said in my previous comment, turnout is very important. So mobilization, who gets their voters out to vote, that will determine the outcome. Of course, there's also a few weeks left of the campaign, but let's assume we get something like the forecast with an increase for the radical right. That would lead to a slightly more fragmented European Parliament. That would lead perhaps to making it slightly more difficult to find the compromises and the majorities, in particular in favor of, let's say, positive outcome results. You may perhaps be able to construe various sources of blocking majorities that could put a deadlock on actions in Europe. And I think looking at the calendar ahead with the American elections this autumn and the continuously very, very troublesome situation in the neighborhood, I think it's a moment where one should also think a little bit about the capacity to act and to decide upon things. Having said that, of course, European Parliament is not the prime locus of foreign policy decisions, but nonetheless, it can be a signal that could potentially be interpreted as the voters saying that we've had a little bit enough of things as they are moving right now in Europe.
And also since, in many countries you have parties on the extreme or very right wing and also on the left wing who are more Russian-friendly, let's say, than others. And it might be difficult to keep Europe together when it comes to Ukraine policy and so forth. That worries me a bit. But I must also say one thing more. Narva, Katri Raik, that woman, I had breakfast with her on Monday.
Oh, how is she doing?
She's doing fine. She did not do this to me.
And if I may give a small travel anecdote, as I'm a big travel fan as well. When I was in high school here in Sweden, I got to make a school exchange with a school in Estonia. And this was prior to independence. So a very sensitive moment in time. And if you compare the situation now, I mean, I'm pretty old, I understand that. But I mean, it's only some 30 years ago. It's remarkable. You know, how a society... And looking back at the situation then and where you find Estonia now, is one of the most consolidated democracies in the world. It has a prosperity, it's topping all the indices you can find in global comparisons. It's quite remarkable. And I remember, I mean, we stayed with families, there was lots of tension in the air. You know, really tension in the air. And that could have been turned in any other direction as well. So thinking about the sensitivities and the turbulence we find in certain areas of Europe, you should also remember the very positive examples there are of what change can bring about.
But there still is quite a bit of
Sure, indeed.
tension in the air.
You mentioned populist parties and new parties coming up here also. The Folklistan is new to the voter. We don't know how it'll go. Yesterday, it was announced that Rasmus Paludan will be a candidate there too. What do you make of that? What kind of influence could they have, and what do you make of it?
Well, in Sweden, we have seen that nearly in every European Parliament election, we have a new party. The Feminist Initiative, the Pirate Party, the list of the Juni list. But I think that those three parties had some idea. They were formed against some ideas. The Pirates against intellectual property rights, the Feminists of obvious reason for women's rights, and the list of June for more Europe and Eurosceptical. I have very hard to see exactly what the Folklistan, Folkviljan is in favor of, more than that they are in favor of those persons. So I mean, I give them a little chance, but nevertheless, I mean, they are extremely vocal, and some of them are quite well known. But it's going to be, I mean, the top figure at the ballot ticket, he's a former Social Democrat, and the second person is a Christian Democrat. So the voter, when they vote for the Christian Democrat, they can get the Social Democrat and vice versa. So, I mean, I found it a little odd, if I may say so.
Yes. Alex, there's another passage in your book, In France, which you could tell us more about, if you like. A very interesting theme park you visited.
I was in Puy du Fou. Has anybody ever heard of Puy du Fou? Yeah, you should. It's very interesting, and it's very scary. It's near the Atlantic up there. Perhaps you can see it. 150 kilometers southwest from Paris. It is a theme park founded in '78 from a man who now is radical right. He's supporting Eric Zemmour and thinks Zemmour is too weak. And this theme park is the second most successful theme park in France after the Asterix and Obelix and perhaps Disneyland. I don't know. Perhaps it's the third. But they've got 3 to 4 million visitors a year. So I went there. And it's some sort of Disney history spectacle. The whole day you can get a little theater thing about how the strong, innocent French won against the Romans. Then how they won against the Brits, how they won against the Goths, the Germans, everybody. And it's always the same narrative. They come very brutal, very, very Nazi-similar guys from somewhere, from the bushes. And they are very strong, very friendly French people in very good clothing. They all look hipster-like. And in the end, they defeat the others. And this is, again and again, the same narrative. We are the strong ones, we are the innocent ones, and the others they are all corrupt and disgusting and brutal. And you sit there for hours and think this can't be true, and people, they love it. they love it. Go to TripAdvisor and write Puy Fou and read their reviews. Now I know so much about. At last, someone told me something about our history. I'm so proud to be French. After Puy Fou, I went to Brussels. Katharina Barley, who made the PR for the EU at that time, asking her, how can we promote Europe in a way? As you said, this is a story of success. This is 75 years of peace. And then she said, you know, we have 30,000 people between 12 and 18 who come to Brussels every year. We are 400 million, 30,000. It's not even 1,000th part of it. And to Puy Fou come 3 million and get impregnated by identitine, but in a very high dosage. After you come out from Puy Fou, you want to shoot everybody except the French. And they even franchised it. It's so successful that now you've got a Puy Fou in Spain. Of course, in the Spanish version, guess what? It's not the French who are the good ones. I'll let you guess who it is. And they are in talks with China. And they wanted to start Tsaristan on the Crimea, which now is no more a matter of... They even had contracts with some Putin friends to start it. So, yeah.
Who's behind it? Who financed it?
The guy is called, I don't know the prénom, but it's De Villiers. He's Philippe De Villiers. Yeah,
okay.
Thanks. And yeah, he's a genius in a way. But Mephistophelian genius, I would say. Yeah.
But what does that tell us about the rise of populism and how should we handle this?
I don't know how we should handle this, but it tells a lot about the rise of populism and how successful they are with their simplistic narratives, with their black and white and black and white and again and again and again it's black and white. The white is always the same, us, and black, well, you can change the enemies. You can count them for days, I would say.
Did the French also won over the Vikings?
Yeah, there's one with the Vikings.
Fake news.
No.
Fake history.
No, because the whole thing is fake news. But
yeah, well,
the Vikings are much stronger than the French, and the French even don't have weapons in that story. But then there appears a saint from the waters and says, peace. And the Vikings fall to their knees and say, oh yeah, thanks. And the French and the Vikings celebrate. That's on this niveau.
I'm slightly skeptical.
Yeah.
Then eventually we got a French royal family in Sweden, so maybe that was the outcome of this whole thing.
Just one more. 4 very well-known historians wrote a book in despair, 400 pages of all the mistakes that are told there, but nobody reads these books and everybody goes there.
No, but I guess we need to teach our children history, and we in the media and everyone needs to point falsifications out. I remember I was in Gdansk in Poland this fall, and I had just spent the entire summer reading about the Second World War, because I'm a nerd, and especially what's happened on the Eastern Front. And there were a lot of not entirely true things there as well. So, and it was the former government Peace who commissioned that museum.
And we were warned in the run to the elections that disinformation would become a major threat. Have you, as a journalist, met attempts of disinformation, and how would you say to the informed person out there how to collect information? What to watch out for?
Not me personally, that I'm aware of, I probably should add. But we as a paper think and discuss about these things all the time. I mean, especially in these AI days with generative AI and so on. You have to question everything, you have to question sources, you have to question who has something to gain from a message and so on. And also go to trusted sources, trusted journalists, trusted experts. And if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. I was talking to a colleague yesterday. She had just been to a seminar for journalists in Oslo, and she sat next to the guy on Washington Post who got if you remember, grabbed him by the pussy tape that on President Trump in 2016 when he talked about doing that. And he told her how he got it from Twitter via one of his followers. And he got it, he wrote something on it, and they published it quite quickly. And today, I'm pretty sure that they wouldn't have done it. We, at least, wouldn't have done it. I mean, if we would get something like that, a tape like that, it would take ages and ages and ages to check whether it was true, whether it was AI. For example, the Kurdish fox, Rava Majid, we got or not I, but some people at the paper got a recording, I think this winter, apparently of him talking about something, and we ended up not publishing it because we could not validate it. We weren't sure that it was genuine. We wrote about it and explained that we've tried to check this, but we don't know. So I think you need to be open. This we know, this we are unsure of, and you have to check everything.
Okay, let's come back.
Can I ask a question? I mean, 3 wonderful Swedes who know everything.
And wonderful journalists.
Just fake news, because we're talking about fake news. How does the government, in your opinion, handle the troll factory problem? I mean, this is just fake news.
It's for politics.
Are you going to quote him?
I say next question.
We are among us. We're just among us.
Well, we
Okay.
don't dive into domestic politics involved.
No, let's keep to EU politics
pity.
today. I'm sure you've talked about it a lot already. So we'll talk about the...
I jump over the pages.
Okay, let's come back to the EU and the elections. Once the new parliament is in place, what would you say are the biggest challenges for the new parliament? You've already mentioned the Green Deal and what, Göran von Sydow, would you say, what are the biggest hurdles that the EU now needs to overcome to achieve the ambitious goals?
Well, it's of course now this is part of democracy. This is now under revision, let's say. So let's wait a little bit for what the voters actually would make out of the current context. To my mind, at least looking at where we are right now, there are quite a number of issues. I mean, the most pressing one, the most urgent one, perhaps, is the situation in Ukraine and the ongoing war on European soil and its consequences for Europe, but also for the stability of the region, of course, as a whole. Secondly, I would say there are a few open items around. One is, of course, the climate policies and the continuation or not of the current Green Deal and the ambitious program which lies therein. Second element, which I think will be very important for the European Union, is sort of the economy, that to make the economy work, and in particular in view of what is a very difficult geopolitical and geo-economic context in which we find ourselves. I mean, Europe has, in a sense, been in a relatively good place since the end of the Cold War, sort of relying very much on multilateralism, on the idea that we, through interdependence, through trade, that will create a more sort of friendly and harmonious world. Now, what we witness over the last decade or so is quite the inverse. So democracy is going down across the globe. It also goes down actually inside the European Union. Autocratic states are increasingly using elements of the economy and the field of technology as to pursue their interests. This puts Europe in a bit of a difficult spot. How to remain loyal to its sort of core principles of how we want to act, being this more soft power based on values and these matters, while at the same time the world looks a little bit more hostile. So that will be a sort of, I think, a very fundamental challenge looking ahead. Then, of course, you have all the other items that are big on the agenda. Migration, you know, how sustainable will this migration pact be? Can it really help to redeem the situation, etc., etc.? So quite a bit of big issues ahead, I think.
And also quite ambitious projects that cost money. If we could look at the spendings, for example, for security, and support for Ukraine, and then also the green transformation. Germany, for example, is now debating on whether they should allow for an increase of national debt to meet all these expenditures. Hans Wallmark, what would you say? What is Sweden's perspective on this? Would Sweden prefer a frugal approach or a higher debt to meet all these costs?
What do you think? I think that we are really part of the frugal ones. Saying that, I mean, I know that the Swedish national debt is now around 30%, something like that. So it's extremely low if you compare it with other countries. I think that several politicians really want to see about if we can maybe raise the debt. The problem is, the challenge is, you start with security and defense, and then you open the Pandora box, and then you can say, well, also infrastructure, the railways, and then you say, well, the hospitals, and then you say, well, the schools and the universities, and then suddenly you go from 30% of national debt to, well, whatever. So therefore, I think this is really in the Swedish DNA, and this is bipartisan in Sweden. I mean, all 8 parties in the Swedish parliament are, if you compare it with other parties in other European countries, we are extremely frugal. Both, in some senses, both national, but absolutely when it comes to the EU budget. Let me also underline what Göran said. I think that it's 2 things that are important for the coming years for the European Union. It's the competitiveness. We really need to avoid to be the tired continent. And we really need to understand that. And that's a global competitiveness. And secondly, the prior 1, 2, and 3 is Ukraine. Because it's about a rule-based world order against, the other side. And it's about, it is an existential threat to our continent. And therefore, it must be in focus.
But don't we need to invest to avoid being the tired continent?
Yeah, but you can invest in different ways. And the problem, I know several politicians, I have them around me in the parliament, and the problem is that every project is a good investment in every politician's eyes. And therefore I think you need to see the difference between real investments and what you label as an investment, but it's only one of different things that you want to do.
But Hans, if you look at it in a comparative, comparing European economy with US and China, there is a strong difference in the level of investment over the last couple of decades, which is part also of the explanation why Europe is lagging behind. So you can do this in various ways, of course. I mean, you could work on making the sort of capital markets work better, but obviously I think looking at all the requests and expectations of what Europe can do, looking ahead, my hunch is that there will be quite some expectation of also increasing, let's say, if it's EU budget or fund. I mean, we have Ukraine, we have the rebuild of Ukraine, which will be probably a European task to do. You have also these demands for investing in the green transition, in research and development, in the digital area. So my question back to you would would this be quite difficult to stay frugal in view of all these concerns being voiced at the capacity at the European level?
Well, my impression is that you're going to find a Swedish parliament very skeptical to increase the EU budget with the Swedish taxpayers' money, and that is not my line. It's 8 parties' line.
All these projects, which are costly and very important and challenges, topics for the EU to face in the next parliament. On top of the list for the Swedish voters, the topic they find most important is climate and the environment. Therese, why do you think is that the case? Is for the Swedish public, why is environment such a topic? And in fact, it's only in Sweden where it is top of the list for voters.
Yeah, I saw that, and I was a bit surprised since, for example, the Green Party only get like 5% in the national polls, double that in the European ones. But I've been thinking about that too, and I think one part might be that we cover climate affairs in the media the same way, more or less, as in at least in the countries I cover. So that's not the difference. And we also see how readers, at least our readers, are not very interested in the climate question if we write articles of the type 2023 was the warmest year on Earth. That people don't read at all. If we write something about, okay, so this is the solution, this is how to do this technological leap forward, then our readers are interested. But I'm thinking maybe it's because we've realized that me not eating meat 5 days a week, or me taking my bike to my country house, which is 200 kilometers away, might not be the solution, but it's something that we need to do together in Brussels. And also this government has been promoting that. That's something new. I mean, you have been saying that this is something, okay, we might not hit our emission targets, but it's something that we need to do together in Brussels. That might be part of the answer. But also, I'm thinking that Swedes tend to be more political correct than in other countries. We are the good guys, the good students, and we want to be the good students. And when we see a question like that, this is just my thinking, I'm not sure of this, but reply what we should reply. Okay, climate, important. And
would you agree?
What do you think? Am I right?
No, but I think it's right. I mean, you attach very different things to Europe depending on your outlook. And that could also relate to political issues that you have a hard time resolving at home. So the top item in the same poll, when it came to the average in the EU 27, that's the fight against poverty and social exclusion. So a real concern that is the most chosen topic for all EU 27. In the Swedish context, politically, this is a non-issue, let's say, because you don't think that European Union has a role in social policy, which is also cross-party kind of agreement, as Swedish actors think that our social model it can fix the problems at hand. So similarly, if you look at it over time, now Swedish voters and some of the parties, they argue that we should do more at the European level to fight organized crime. Again, it's a real problem at home. You have a hard time solving it. There is a European arena where you can sort of upload certain issues. So that's also part of why the EU moves forward all the time with the different structures, different problems that we have domestically.
You were thinking?
Yeah, just one little thing I wanted to add to the problem of climate change. Europe loves to speak about values. No other continent talks so much and so loud and so proudly about values. Malawi is a country in Africa which produces over 1 year as much CO2 emissions as Germany does in 1 day. How dare we talking about values towards them? We spoil the world in a way. So for me, it's the core task of Europe to get the Green Deal on track.
Is there a risk of the Green Deal being ripped apart, as some parties would like to? Now, when we look at the possible outcome, with a more move to the right in the parliament and Green parties more weakened, what would you say?
Well,
Swedish?
it depends very much on the result. So I think that we need to wait for the result. But absolutely, I think that at least we can see some parties in some countries is having that in focus. So it's also, I mean, the challenge for the European Parliament and the Commission is that this traditional three-party bloc is threatened by different forces and from different areas, from different angles, not only from the populist party and the radical right, but different, lots of different parties in the European countries. So this traditional making it up in the dark rooms behind the scene with the smoking cigars between EPP, SOD and ALDE, that is probably going to be challenged after this European Parliament election.
That sounded very male with the smoking cigars.
Yeah, well, it's an American trend.
Let's move to the topic of EU enlargement, which has been on top of the agenda, also much talked about since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. only a few days after the invasion, Ukraine submitted its application. And some see since then also enlargement as a key tool to stabilize the EU's neighborhood and counteract growing dominance of China and Russia. Now, will the next round of enlargement come, and will it strengthen the EU, and in how far? What would you say, Hans Wallmark?
The answer is yes. And if I talk from the Swedish Parliament is in favor of enlargement. They have a quite broad consensus. Sometimes you can hear skeptical voices from the Swedish Democrats, but one party and then the all other 7 parties, even the former more EU skeptical parties, the Left Party and the Green Party, have always been in favor of enlargement. So I think that the question to you is yes, but I don't think that Swedish politicians understand what price we need to pay for enlargement. So we are in favor of it, but we are not discussing yet in Sweden the consequences of enlargement. The card that we draw in the Swedish Parliament is, well, look about the common agriculture politics. You can do things there, but you need to do more than that. And then it's also, I mean, it's quite optimistic to think that other countries want to reform that. So I think that Swedish politicians are in favor of enlargement, but we don't discuss still how to enlarge and the consequences also for us as a country.
But I think that's true in all European countries, more or less, that we say that we are for it, but this big discussion that needs to be had isn't really had yet.
Yeah, but I think, I think they're talking about this more in Finland, but maybe you're right. But I think that is really the challenge for politicians that are in favor of enlargement, because they have not really make the master plan yet, and therefore convinced the other countries and other politicians that are not so keen on enlargement.
And one element is, of course, that it is a matter of preparing the European Union itself, being ready to be capable of harboring 35 member states. But of course, it's also about the transformation of these states. You know, we've already now talking about the problems internally in the EU with elements of rule of law and democratic backsliding, the corruption element. So of course, here's the geopolitical pressure of keeping the time, you know, keeping the hope and the element, but at the same time being vigilant on how not to shake up or how not to import insecurity or instability inside the European Union. And that reminds me of your book, of your story, because it also reminds me of an old trip. I was doing voluntary work in Bosnia right after the war, and I also remember these travels and trips in how bridges were not there anymore, and you had to go all these detours, and the Bosniak drivers, they wouldn't pass certain districts and areas, and the friend of mine who was only a few years older than me, had served in the war, of course, could point out all these places where he had been in the mountains during the war, and this is not a very long time ago. But still, there's so little that has happened if you compare to those members who became member states, the other story of Estonia. So just a reminder to say that here are lots and lots of tensions that one should take into account.
But I also interviewed a couple of Ukrainians. You talked about transition. I interviewed a couple of Ukrainian experts some months ago, and they both said that we want to change Ukraine, we are ready to change it, but we need help to know how to do it. And they really wanted, they were asking Brussels and all the other EU countries to really give us a list. Because right now we all get headlines and we don't know how to fill them with, and we need help to do that. We want to change, but please help us. And I think that was really interesting.
And does the EU have to change, and in what way? Are reforms necessary to be able to integrate the new members then? Is the EU fit for 35?
I think there are various views on this. I mean, typically Swedish view would be to say, no, we can muddle through. We don't need to change too much. We've done it before. So it's rather thinking about the transition or the way into full membership. Then, of course, there are other views who would say you cannot link this sort of already trouble of balancing ambition with unity. And they would favor more of a multi-speed Europe at this point. Let those who are very ambitious move ahead, and while the others who are not as ambitious or are not ready yet be in the second layer, etc. Of course, this is it's a very tricky question. It's a very, it's not easy to, you can have that in an academic seminar, but then if you want to do politics from this, it becomes all of a sudden much more complicated. But I think it would be wise at least to think ahead a little bit, because any enlargement previously has also been linked to slight reforms, at least, to accommodate. Otherwise, there will be a risk that we run into something which makes the EU dysfunctional instead.
You wanted to say something about reform? Or?
A lot. Just one point adding to this question of enlargement. I mean, that we still have that the European Council is forced to vote everything in unanimity is, for me, crazy, really crazy, because everybody can take all the others as hostages. What Orban does again and again and again. It's just 26 who still at 2 o'clock in the morning say, please, Victor, please say yes, and then in the end he says yes. And another thing is...
or find a toilet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing is which you could change in a snap. It's that after every of these marathons where they spend 48 hours together, closed somewhere, and nobody knows what they're talking about, and then afterwards, there's not a press conference of 27 responsibles saying, this is what we all together as Europeans have decided. But everybody goes home and giving his version. And I mean, it's easy to guess what this means. It's 27 different hero versions of what I did for you and what all these other assholes in Brussels did again. And I saved you from... And I think this would sell Europe in a very effective way, very much. And it would be easy to change that, I think. But you are the politician.
But I think that your description is totally correct. No, but as I said, I don't think that politicians still, at least in Sweden, has not starting to think about exactly what kind of reforms. The only thing that we really have opened for is to abolish the unanimity on security issues, because we have seen this hostage. As you explain, and that have annoyed us a lot.
Yeah, but that what you're saying is really have annoyed me too. With 27 winners, and they all blame Brussels on what went wrong, and it's like, no, Brussels didn't decide that. You and your 26 colleagues decided that.
And Orban gets through with it every time. In Brussels, he said yes, and then he goes home and says, no, I didn't. Yeah. Of course, I didn't. And it's so easy for him to lie. And,
and therefore, at least I really try also to say that, well, the European Parliament election is important, but the national elections is also very important, because it's the governments inside the European Council. So it's not only... We tend to blame all the bad things also for the Parliament, but as you say, it's really the governments.
And how much European affairs do we talk about in the Swedish parliamentary elections?
Like yesterday.
It's economy, stupid.
So let's not talk about the topic that we almost wanted to talk about. We've touched on the long-term perspective, EU and 5, 10, 15 years. Could I also mention the question of the euro? Most recently, the Swedish economy has had prominent voices speaking in favor of introducing the euro to Sweden. What is the Swedish perspective? Will we see the euro in Sweden in 5, 10 years' time?
If you see in the opinion polls, it's 15-20%, something like that. But it had been only a single digit before, so it's better now than from a euro perspective. Let me put it this way. I have been an advocate and campaigning for Sweden into NATO for the last 25 years. It took a while, but we are now an ally. So therefore, I think it's very hard to say Sweden is not going to be part of Europe the coming 5 or 10 years. But I think that you need to have the same circumstances as the NATO membership. You need to have some kind of price. because if you're going to rely on the parties and the voters, I think it's still far away. But if something very dramatically and radical happens, like the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which absolutely changed the mind for at least two parties and for several voters, then it's you open the way for that. But personally, I think it's quite far away. But
may I ask you there? Do you think there is one party who it would be easier to do that for in power? For example, I think that the NATO process went so fast because there was a social democratic government.
That changes his mind.
Yes. Do you think it would be easier for the other side to if there was a crisis or something?
Well, I think that, in Sweden it's now only one party that are in favor, and that's the Liberal Party, and in the last opinion poll they had around 3% or something like that. So absolutely, but you need to have lots of convertees in Sweden. And I would say you have some similarities between NATO and Euro. It's also, you have some kind of religious dimension on it. It's touch upon how we feel like Swedes. And I think that is also the explanation why you only have around, what is now 20%?
Well, now it's actually moving up. That was my addendum. Well, I agree with Hans' overall assessment. So we measure every year the Euro opinion, public opinion, and it's actually now gradually getting closer. There's still a slightly more those who are against, but it's now beyond 30%. So the gap is much smaller.
But the big group of indifferent.
Exactly. So it's more like, I do think there is similarities with the NATO public opinion, which was roughly 1/3 yes, 1/3 no, 1/3 undecided. Then politics decided, the war happened, politics decided. So, but I think two additional elements maybe. That is the first one, I think it relates to this discussion we had before about Europe in multiple speeds or different. So then becomes a question, where does Sweden belong then? Do we want to be in the outer tier or the inner tier? And that relates to the framing of the issue. When Sweden voted about the Euro 20 years ago, it was strictly, it was such a dominance of economists, of the cost-benefit, analysis. Do we gain from it? Very much, you could count on this. I think the Finns, they took a different approach. They said, this is geopolitical, this is a currency, but still, we know what we want to do. What I'm suggesting is that I think a renewed discussion will need to be framed in slightly different terms than the previous ones. Of course, there is the corona, the problem. That's a real problem, of course, for Swedes, let's say. But I think then, finally, not trying to be too long, politics, your question, Therese, isn't there a problem that we have right now in Sweden two distinct blocks in politics, and they are both divided on this issue? So it's very hard to say who has the easier task. The easiest task would rather be to say, the big parties agree on this, but I don't see that really happening. That's up to Hans to work on.
Well, let me add, because I also think that you can find very interesting differences between Finland and Sweden, and one of them, Finland belong to the European Union. Sweden belongs to the European community. In the Swedish mind. And we also use it, and now I'm going to use the Swedish word. Vi talar om gemenskapen, Finland talar alltid om unionen, and that is a main difference.
I have a friend, he says that we married for the money, but got pregnant with the constitution. We still haven't really accepted, the thing that we're in a union.
No, exactly.
So does Sweden feel it's not really part of all of the decisions in the EU, of the union, if they don't have the euro, like a member of second rank?
No, exactly. And that is, I think, the absolutely best argument for the campaigners in favor of euro. It's not only about the currency and the problem that we have now with the Swedish krona is to belong to the inner circle of the European Union.
But Swedes never feel like a member of the second rank. We always feel like we're the best.
Yeah, but don't tell the others.
But one difference on the religious aspect, that 20 years ago, you remember, we still had actual coins. And there's a certain attachment maybe to the coins and the notes. Yeah. Nowadays, we're still always with the mobile or whatever. So, the whole idea of the coins. Well, do you carry coins, Hans?
Well, cash is king,
Sorry, I have to contradict you. I arrived here on the 1st of November 22. I have never seen krona in all the time. Just swish and
I don't
So
think
that's
I have
that's my
either.
point. You know, the emotional
Yeah.
attachment in 2003 when Swedes voted on the euro, maybe then it was much more worth it, you know, that this is my, now I don't
This is
even
my
know, what does it
Astrid
look like? I
Yeah.
can't remember now. Who's on the 20 krona or whatever? I don't know.
Selma Lagerlöf, no?
Could be, could still be, could be someone else.
Greta Garbo, Dag Hammarskjöld,
Okay,
Astrid
so you know
Lindgren.
this. Okay.
Gold star to you.
Okay, I think it's time to open up for the audience. I'd like to invite you to raise your hand if you have a question or a comment. Preferably keep it concise so we can fit many questions and answers. Varsågod. Bitteschön.
Paul Ruin, freelance journalist. Brother Hans, who Alex met in the NATO discussions. The EU budget for next seven-year period. I wonder, especially for Göran and Hans, what do you think? I mean, 2/3 go to, as you mentioned, Hans, to either the foreign policy or the cohesion policy to the regions. 2/3. Will we see that in the next period too? Will it go down?
You want to go? I think there are strong demands on various other areas of spending. However, if you look at the agricultural protests already now, you also see that the political sensitiveness of this issue is very high. So it's going to be a very rough ride, I think, to get that. On cohesion, maybe one can think in slightly different terms. Why? We have seen, I mean, the MFF is one element, but then there is the galaxy of EU funds. We do all kinds of things, various special funds for various special needs. The big one, of course, being the recovery facility after COVID. Maybe that template is getting more interesting to several actors across Europe. Maybe taking up some loans, maybe designing special funds for special needs. That's at least my impression. And that would make it slightly easier to negotiate about the MFF, the normal multi-annual financial framework. But of course, Swedes tend to be quite skeptical also on going to the markets for big loans.
Absolutely. So it's going to be complicated and rough, but it's also going to be a compromise. And it's going to end with that 27 government leaders going home to their own capitals and say, we won. So to answering your question, maybe small changes, but quite small, not substantial.
More questions from the audience?
Don't be shy. Yes.
Please. There's a microphone coming for you.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank a fascinating panel of really, I think every issue has been touched on except to extend an invitation to the distinguished German guest to visit Ireland on his next trip, because the story of Irish transformation through that journey of tolerance and learning, and yes, cohesion and solidarity, but the true experience has been transformative in the country. And my colleague from Croatia and I and other recent member states were talking about this in Malmö University. And we said that when we told the story of enlargement with the presence of other colleagues, ambassadors, that it really brought, the students said to us, it really brought Europe to light. So that future challenge of enlargement, I think, is the hope that we can get there, and it will. Sorry, Hans, it's going to take institutional, constitutional change of the Union and a lot of us digging into our pockets to support that opportunity for peace and tolerance in Europe. And thank you for an amazing panel, but do visit Ireland and I can arrange that for you. Thank you.
And my message back to Ireland, the great Emerald Island of Ireland. NATO is also a way of securing security in Europe.
And you have obviously been to Ireland several times, right?
Yes, of
Yes.
course. No, it was just I couldn't handle it because I had to be in Denmark and then shit, Ireland.
Very sorry. There are so few trains running to Ireland. So this is
Okay. Sean Williams there in the back.
Hello, Sean Williams from Mundus International. Also a non-European, here as an Australian, but lived in Europe, or bits of Europe that splintered off as well in the UK for 20 years of my life. I'd like to actually start with the beginning hypothesis about what is Europe and what's the enduring value of tolerance. And then I want to try and you then quite, I think, nicely brought this story in of the bogeyman and the bogeyman always, not being French or not being Spanish. But as Europeans, there are bogeymen in the world out there now, and I'm interested in how that come from outside of the core EU 28, 27 or 35. How do you motivate Europeans to actually, without sort of getting into the political side of things, bring out the competitiveness? Because without a more competitive economy, Europe will just continue to sink further and further behind. And direct, yes, maybe the bogeyman story needs to be defined and shifted, because there are actors out there who don't share the same values, and if you don't get sharper about how you perform internally within your economies, how you view things geopolitically, then you continue to sink further and further behind. So how does one shift that debate? And then I'm particularly interested from Hans to hear about competitiveness. We heard in Mundus, when during the Swedish presidency, that one of the victories for Sweden during the presidency was got competitiveness onto the agenda. But still, more than a year on, it's not so much has happened there.
No, but it's still at the agenda. Well, and I think that I think that you really need to repeat this, and I totally agree with your description, and that really you really need to have a focus on the competitiveness. But saying that, everything is also overshadowed by the ugly war. So that, as I said, that was also the priority number one for the Swedish presidency. That was to have the focus on Ukraine, support of Ukraine, and defending the values of our continent by helping Ukraine after the full-scale invasion. But I think I would be extremely pleased if I heard more politicians, several politicians from several countries, talking more about competitiveness. It's not only one country that can do that, and it's not only one politician. You need really have the union talk about that.
Would you like to add? No?
I don't have a competitive edge on that.
More than that, you need investments.
In that case, we'll take another question there in the back, please.
Thank you. My name is Katarina Omnils-Franke. I'm a journalist at Access and also an author. Rilke Übersetzerin, unter anderem. Therese, you were mentioning the importance of reliable press, and in times of diminishing press, I wonder if, and we have the importance of reliable reporters, but media is diminishing. Is that the same case in all of Europe, or only in Sweden? How is it in Germany? Are the foreign correspondents being replaced by Brussels correspondents? How do you see on the future for foreign correspondents?
It depends on the country. I remember sitting with a good friend of mine in Berlin who's a moderator on ZDF, the television channel, and we were discussing correspondence, and he was saying, well, we have 15 correspondents in Moscow, and I said, well, the Swedish television has 1 and the radio 1. Well, now they don't even have 1, but this was some years ago, and we continued doing that, and it was 20 there and 15 there and so on and so forth, and we had 1 and 1. And then after a while, we realized that, okay, when he says that we have 15, he means 15 journalists. Then they have 15 cameramen and 15 sound technicians and secretaries and so on and so forth. And we still only have 1. So Sweden is a middle-sized country, not small, but with a very limited budget. And we see how we have less and less people in other countries and less correspondents, but more stringers who have contracts, but not all the benefits. And to answer your question, I think times do get tougher, so we probably will see less and less in many countries, but probably not in Germany, not for a while at least.
But there is a problem if you compare also the European correspondents, be it in Brussels or other European countries. You have much fewer today than at the time of Swedish EU membership.
Oh,
you also have fewer than the Nordic neighbors.
Oh, yeah.
So that doesn't really make sense. I mean,
No.
they are smaller countries. And you have much more correspondence covering United States. It's important. I mean, I don't want to say anything about it, but it's something there that one should think a little bit about.
Yeah,
right?
and the problem is that we measure really carefully what our readers want.
Yeah.
Not to get clicks, because we want to give them what they want, which is a good thing and a not so good thing at the same time. Because readers, at least Svenska Dagbladet's readers, are not very interested in Europe, to my big sadness. And I try to say that, okay, but if we don't write about Europe, they don't learn anything, and then they're not interested. So it's the hen and the egg. And it's sometimes, I remember I wanted to write an article about Horst Seehofer when he was interior minister in Germany. And because I'm very interested in German politics, and my editor, he was like, what? and then he himself had written an article about a minor person in the White House just the day before, and I was like, this is the interior minister in Germany.
Elections in
Exactly.
This
But
is
hasn't the perspective changed a little?
President,
Yeah.
Because I remember when I first came here, USA was very much in the focus of foreign correspondents' news. But now, slowly, I see more interest in Germany and
Yes.
in the EU. I hope you keep working on.
I think it has changed a little
shaping
bit
interest.
due to the war in Ukraine, because we're interested in what other countries do and what debates they are having, and also with the NATO membership. I think you're right. I think it's slowly changing.
Slowly but surely. Your perspective as a foreign correspondent?
A double perspective, once as a foreign correspondent and then having made this journey across Europe, one thing that really astonished me, how few journalists were in Brussels. I mean, 40% of the laws of every country are produced in Brussels. So this is much, much more important to us than the US, in a way, in our daily life. But as you said, it's difficult to transfer it and to wrap it up in interesting stories. If people hear EU, they fall instantly in a sort of a coma, and that's boring, that's dry,
And also because the decision process is so long and it's on so many levels at the same time, so it's difficult to cover. Okay, so the parliament has decided A, and then we have someone who's sort of 20-ish something who doesn't really know how the EU works and writes that EU decided that, and you go like,
really, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, decision making is Swedish Parliament. Of course, Hans he knows every detail about counter proposition voting and so on in committees, but that's quite complicated if you go into that details as well.
True.
True is same as decision making in the US. It's not that it's uber fast, right? I mean, things can get stuck for years and years, and still there is some way of covering it. My best idea of why this is, it has to do with popular culture. The amount of movies and TV series and whatever about American presidents and heroes, it gives you sort of shortcut. You think, well, I think I get this, you know?
True.
But look at that at the European side. I mean, not that great examples, right? And of course, we have different languages. We have the different traditions and everything. We don't have common media. There's something wrong with my microphone, so I should stop talking. But I think that's a little bit, you know, the question to me at least. How can you make this more interesting in a sense, also from a journalistic point of view? You need to be able to portray the conflicts, portray the differences in ways in which can be tangible for
But there is a TV series
voters.
about the European Parliament that's supposed to be really funny.
I heard about it.
We should get SVT to buy it.
Is that true?
More questions?
Yes.
I've heard it. I heard it's true. It's shown on Access
right
TV,
here, please.
actually.
Yeah, right.
I'm Croatian ambassador. Thank you very much for the wonderful opportunity. It's really a great discussion, and I really enjoyed following. I think I first have a question for Alex, because you mentioned Zagreb also, and I think you have a little bit simplified view of my country, same as of Estonia, if I might say. But I think it's a problem that most of us here in this room have, that we live in our bubble, as we mostly deal with international affairs, and it's a very small group of people. So we are not the real representative of our societies. And the place you mentioned in France is basically what it is in most of the countries of European Union. And we have to, in my modest view, we have to come closer to those people, but not ignoring them, but rather including them. So that's, I would like to hear more, maybe Hans from you, how do you think we can approach those people who still believe that Europe is a union of sovereign states? And that's a big challenge because as I said, we are more or less Wilsonians, if I may say. So, and as Robert Gilpin, famous international affairs professor from Princeton, noted in 1987, he said, all this international organization seems to send a wrong message to their own people because they forget easily that these international organizations are still built of countries which are sovereign countries, and they keep this very strong in their pocket. This is why I think you politicians can maybe help us understand how we can approach average people in every society and make them more international and more enthusiastic about European Union as our common umbrella, if I may say. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, absolutely. I think that it's important. I think that for at least Swedes, Europe is not a federation. It's a jigsaw. It's a puzzle. And that is really the advantage. It's the charm that you see the difference between Croatia, Sweden, Estonia. I really think that we should protect that. And therefore, I have not a single answer for that, but I think it's very important to understand the different traditions and what have happened in different countries. So I'm going to recommend two authors that I really read and learn about from, and that's Ivan Krasteva. I think it's fantastic to explain for us in the western part of Europe what have happened, not in the eastern part, but in Central Europe, and that's important. I think this is also a mistake we tend to do, to call countries like Croatia or the Czech Republic or Poland East Europe. They are Central Europe. So that's important. And then Timothy Garton Ash's latest book, I think that's two good guides into European history and to understand what have happened in different countries. And I think that we sometimes show too little respect for the last 30, 40 years journey for different countries. But absolutely, but then it's also both simple and quite funny to simplify.
Mm-hmm. Okay, before we wrap up, I have a last question. The German Foreign Ministry has a campaign and promotes Europe as best place on earth. It is based on the notion that Europe can be proud of itself, of its achievements of free and democratic Europe, even if there are things that maybe need to be improved and others that need to be defended, but this is the sense Europe is a very special place. Now, in that sense, Europe, the best place on earth, I'd like to ask every one of you, why is Europe the best place on earth to you? Starting with Alex.
Because traveling 300 kilometers means coming across 3 or 4 borders, 3 or 4 languages, 3 or 4 different national histories, cultures, rituals, food and beers. So yeah, that's Europe for me.
And wine.
Wine, of course, wine.
Therese.
I think because in every European country I feel at home. It feels like it's my continent. And it's obvious, I mean, if you would tie a band around my head and let me down anywhere and take it off. I mean, even if the countries are very different, you can still tell that you're in Europe. The United States looks the same everywhere. The countryside, the landscape is very different, but the buildings, the malls, the shops looks exactly the same. And Europe is so diverse, and it's something I love. But yet culturally, we belong together, which I think is amazing.
Well, I agree with all of what's been said, and of course, this is by now also the center of democracy of the world. One should really cherish that. But one point which I like about the kind of balance between cooperation and also some competition sometimes. What's funny, we have now the Euro Cup in Germany, and of course, this is also the element where where we fight, we compete, and we can do it in a fearful but friendly way. And we can also make jokes, on a good day at least, about each other's. And that's something which is quite nice. You can play around with stereotypes, and you can make fun, and you can still go out and say, yeah, let's say, we have to solve this anyway. So I'm looking forward to Olympic Stadium final in Berlin between Germany and France on Bastille Day. That's going to be good.
Well, we would hope so.
I bet rather on Croatia this time.
Yeah, that's a good team. I mean, Sweden is not even there, so we have to be European this time.
Don't mention it.
Why is Europe
first,
the best place for you?
I'm a true ardent believer, and I think it's the diversity, but at the same time that you feel home. If you're in Porto or you are in Copenhagen, or every place, every city and every state has its own charm. And I think that, and therefore I really agree with you to protect that. But also, Europe is a continent with a foundation, with a heritage from Athens, Rome, and Jerusalem. And that makes us as a fantastic continent.
Beautiful. I guess we should leave it with this final word. It was beautiful. One still very last question. Could I ask you to wrap up the discussion now? What was your main takeaway from today's discussion? Of course, you're all very informed, but is there anything that you especially take away from today?
I just feel longing to go on a train trip.
Yes, me too.
But my wish would then be that European decision makers could maybe move a little bit faster in making European trains work slightly better. That would be my election plea.
And find a train to Lisbon.
Yeah, I only can, I can emphasize this. I've tried to take the train from Stockholm to Munich, and it's each time torture. Yeah.
I felt totally inspired by your book, and I immediately started thinking, maybe I should write a book like that.
Please do. We'll have another panel.
And I really want to go to Ireland now.
Don't forget Ireland in your book.
I won't forget Ireland.
So with this, here we are in Europe, and we have really enjoyed this talk and still have the urge to go and travel around. Now, thank you very much to the audience here at the German Embassy. Thank you to the audience online. Thank you very much to our panelists. It was a pleasure to have you here. And thank you all for listening. And yes, welcome back. Bye-bye, auf Wiedersehen und tack så mycket.
Tack själv.
Oh, no, thank you.